Heading, Land at St John's. Paragraph 9, just to read, no built development will be allowed in the buffer zone. Now, how hard is that? Once again, thank you for your work. And if you have been listening, thank you very much. 6.
I was feeling generous. Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Mr. Shillito. Sorry, Mr. Hamill.
To go for Reg 19 again today would be a massive mistake. There are two key evidence documents which have just landed, which should have been available in Reg 18 to inform and shape this plan. The water cycle study, with its questionable methodology, where Exmouth's Mare Lane treatment site calculations take no accounts for tourist accommodation, including the Sandy Bay town, or that the status quo of regularly dumping sewage in the sea is an acceptable solution. Councillors, please make your own judgment, and if you pledge to residents to try to sort this out, this starts today with you rejecting this study as flawed. Otherwise, you're accepting that the current situation is okay and South West Water gets away with minimal investment. The mitigation strategy, which Mr. Freeman convinced you on the 4th of February would provide a solution, as of today, over 9 months later, concludes it was not possible to screen out a likely significant effect within the Pebblebed Heaths. The plan will need to be amended to eliminate this residual adverse effect. No viable mitigation, so no supporting each HRA and therefore no legally compliant plan. I told you this December 11th, February 4th, and for what it's worth, I stand here again today. Mr. Freeman's professionalism should compel him to advise you the same. He quotes paragraph 86, but he never mentions that the LPA must believe the plan is sound and legally compliant. The appearance of both these deficient documents now has created an opportunity to take stock. Do you want to send a plan that appears sound and legally compliant to the inspector, or do you want to send this plan, which is evidently neither? This would be so short-sighted, as you can address many of the issues with a few non-significant tweaks now and have much greater confidence when sending this plan to the inspector. Remember, you currently have spare above headroom allocation of 563 houses in this draft plan, and I'm not suggesting that it's utilised solely for XMO 20, but if sound or legal compliance issues can be addressed by using this spare capacity, it would be wise to get this plan more compliant now. The half of the XMO 20 site which failed HELAR and has multiple compliance issues is 550. Coincidence, perhaps. If you do not address this now, you should scenario plan for a third Reg 19 consultation. Not so far-fetched when you recall the timetable Mr. Freeman stated last time. And how will 3 appear to the inspector when they consider significant changes? Mr. Freeman, if you could remove a site from the plan to make it more sound and legally compliant, which would you select? Ultimately, these sites selected need to be viable, deliverable solutions, not ones forced somehow to comply with endless onerous clauses and complex specialist reports. To continue with this plan, it needs to be a conscious decision based on the evidence that's available now. Please look at the end goal and not just kick the non-compliance issues onto the next stage. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Shillito. Next up then, please, Mr. John.
Thank you, Chair, Committee. I speak on behalf of Clinton Devon Estates, who are the owners of the land to the east of Liverton Business Park in Exmouth, known as XMO 18, and which is proposed to be allocated for employment purposes. The estate already operates the existing and successful business park which adjoins the site. They therefore welcome the proposal to allocate XMO 18 for employment use and the role this can play in underpinning Exmouth's future growth alongside wider housing in the area. The estate also welcomes a proposal which is now being presented as a refinement to the previous draft, whereby the southern part of their land is now to have the potential to accommodate buildings. Having the potential for all areas of the allocation to be used to provide employment space is vital to the viability and deliverability of the land. However, we note that the policy in its current revised proposal proposes that access for Exmo 18 should only come from within the existing business park to the west, and there should be no access from Salterton Road. We understand that this is primarily due to concerns about the potential impact on the nearby national landscape. This restriction is an important area of concern to the estate. They fully recognise the need to ensure any scheme addresses potential impacts on the nearby national landscape. However, the proposed restriction is unduly onerous given the context, given that views would be within the backdrop of the existing built-up area to the north and west, and the very much larger mixed Exmo 17 scheme, which, unlike the estates land, will actually be within the national landscape immediately to the south. The prevention of such impacts can be fully addressed as part of any later planning application process to control building heights, landscaping, engineering, and so on. From a commercial perspective, many prospective tenants will require a strong frontage and ease of access for customers. Whilst an access from within the existing business park may be acceptable for some occupiers within the northern part of Exmo 18, customers and tenants accessing those within the southern part will be faced with a 1.4-mile round trip to get on and off via the existing Liverton Business Park access. This is clearly a major disincentive to many would-be occupiers and therefore undermines the deliverability and viability of the entire area, not least given that the southern part, being somewhat flatter and with a better frontage, would ordinarily be the most lettable part of the site. It is also important to note that requiring access to all parts of Exmo 18 from the existing business park, which is served by a single access, risks generating and concentrating traffic congestion over what is already a busy junction. In light of all this, we request that the policy wording for Exmo 18 be adjusted to allow for at least the possibility of providing an access from Salterton Road, where this can be shown to be acceptable from a landscape and highway safety perspective, and in line with the normal requirements of securing planning permission before any development proceeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John. Mr. Tierman.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Escape Exmouth. We welcome the publication of the water cycle study, but it's essential that this is accurate and takes all evidence into consideration. I want to draw your attention today to our concerns about the study, and specifically the comment in 7.13 of the report you've got today, which says that the evidence is robust. I want to give you an explanation why I disagree with that. There are gaps in the evidence, unanswered questions, and simple mistakes. The report fails to expose the full extent of South West Water's poor performance, which moved the District Council to pass a vote of no confidence in South West Water. From our experience of the last few years, it's obvious that the current network is not coping. Storm flows regularly spill untreated sewage into our water with only modest amounts of rain, yet this is not reflected in the report. Other gaps. South West Water itself says insufficient sewer capacity is the reason for high number of storm overflows in 13 sites in East Devon, including 9 sewage treatment works. There's nothing on the poor performance that resulted in the Ofwat settlement of £25 million to make amends. There's no mention of the high pollution incident rate. South West Water has more than double the national average. There's no examination of the impact of not building Cranbrook. This was central to the previous report in 2010. This missing evidence points to a network already under severe strain. And there are questions that should have been answered. Mayor Lane was approaching capacity in 2010, yet the consented flow was increased by 30% without any additional work. This effectively reduces its ability to deal with rainfall. Is this the reason for the increase in spills and duration? There's no comparison between local trends and regional patterns. Spills in Exmouth are 79% higher. The duration has doubled since 2020. Why is it so far above the national average? Why are our rising mains failing, in some cases after less than 20 years? The report also assumes a reduction in water use of a third. Given that current consumption of water is 150 litres per day per person, how do we get there? No comment about it. The report would be more robust with answers to these questions. Finally, some silly mistakes. The report gives an impression that Exmouth Works is complete and we're all happy about it. But in fact, it's not going to be complete and delivering benefits until 2030 at least. South West Water has admitted errors in data. Douglas Avenue on the Mare has never spilled for nearly 15 years, yet it appears in this robust report.
Could I ask you to finish up, please, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I recommend a pause and consideration to make it robust.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Good morning, councillors, and thank you for inviting us to speak. My name is Peter Williams, and I'm representing the Otter Valley Association, a civic society with over 2,000 members and supporters. As you know, the objective of the water cycle study is to inform the East Devon local plan, ensure it supports sustainable growth, and identify housing constraints that may limit housing growth. We are here to support the study's conclusion that no additional housing load should be applied to the Honiton, Fenton and Fluxton catchments without first addressing the clear deficits in treatment capacity. In 2024, Honiton Sewage Works discharged untreated sewage directly into the Otter for nearly 5,000 hours. In this study, we find out why. Honiton has the second highest number of wastewater vulnerability indicators and is already exceeding its treatment capacity by 40%, and that's just in dry weather. The Otter also has the biggest phosphate problem in the region, with 70% coming from sewage works. Honiton is the source of over half that phosphate and has been in breach of its permit condition on phosphate for 3 of the past 6 months. The Otter is officially designated a sensitive area for phosphate, and the visible environmental impacts of high phosphate include dense blanket weed and algae growth, smothering the riverbed. It's worth noting that 3 of the study's 4 red status sewage works discharge directly into the River Otter. Honiton is now projected to see the largest proportional increase in housing in the region, with 838 new homes, with significant growth also planned for Fluxton and Fenton. To accommodate this planned development, Honiton will require a 73% increase in treatment capacity from the report, the greatest deficit in the region, and Fluxton and Fenton will require 25% and 20% respectively. The study therefore concludes no additional housing load should be applied to Honiton, Fenton and Fluxton catchments without first addressing the clear deficits in treatment capacity and phosphate removal. However, there is a silver lining in the report. It does appear that South West Water could remedy several critical issues and enable much needed home building by bringing forward the scheduled update of Honiton to a 2030 completion. A relatively low and overdue investment by South West Water, providing the required treatment capacity and phosphate removal, could unlock significant investment and pressure on local housing. We therefore ask the Council to require South West Water to bring forward these plans before considering any further development in the Otter catchment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And I would point, as that's a straightforward question to answer, to recommendation 5 of the first substantive paper on the agenda. We will absolutely be looking at that. Recommendation 6, got my numbers mixed up. We will absolutely be looking at exactly that measure. There will be a further report in the new year, which will be looking at what phasing and delaying of development that we need to do. So just to reassure, that will absolutely be on our agenda at a subsequent meeting. Mr. Freeman, there's a number of points there that I think probably warrant picking up briefly, if I may, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So yes, if we go back to the beginning, so I think there were concerns expressed by Mr. Humphrey about how public comments are being considered through the plan-making process. Obviously, members have received reports after each consultation summarising the responses received, and then a series of reports about how we've then taken those comments on board and the amendments that have been made to the plan. So I think we've actually been very open and transparent throughout the process in terms of the consultations and how those have been dealt with. However, clearly we haven't addressed all of the comments that the public have been raising. In some cases, it's simply not possible to address those concerns, or we don't feel that it's necessary to do so. But I'm confident all comments have been heard and considered through the process, and that's documented in the reports that you've received. There was a call to remove ambiguity over the 400-metre zone for XMO 20, concern about commercial and other uses in those areas. The requirement for the 400-metre zone, however, relates to residential development and in particular impacts on wildlife arising from predation from pets and animals kept at residential properties within that zone, and fires, domestic fires and things. Those issues wouldn't arise with community uses or commercial uses, and so I don't see a planning basis upon which to restrict those uses within that zone, albeit we obviously need to be very careful about the impacts on the wider landscape and the habitats, the pebble bed heaths, which would need to be assessed through an application process and habitat regulations assessment at that time. But I don't see a basis upon which to exclude those forms of development within that area through policy. Moving on, Mr. Hamill made some points about moving the settlement boundary and the site boundary to exclude that 400-metre zone. Again, the comments I've just made apply to that. I think the other point to make there is that obviously the access into XMO 20 is through that 400-metre zone. And so we need to ensure that the site has an acceptable access for it to be viable and deliverable. We don't know precisely where that access will come in, and so we can't draw a line just around the access. We need the whole of that area within the site. There is also the point about potential commercial and community uses that could take place in that area and may well be acceptable in terms of habitat mitigations and issues there. I think Mr. Shillito made some points about the water cycle study and it not taking account of Sandy Bay. I admit it doesn't make it clear what's in the baseline, but the assessment has been done based on the discharges running through the existing system. So logically, it takes account of the existing population of the area. And those measurements, I think, have been taken at various points. So it should take account of the impacts currently being felt by the wastewater treatment system. In terms of the habitat regulations assessment, I'll freely admit I had hoped that we would have that completely addressed by now and would be able to rule out significant effects on the pebble bed heaths in terms of air quality issues. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. There is further work needed in terms of developing a mitigation strategy in terms of the impacts of air quality on the pebble bed heaths. What we have is a robust assessment of the impacts there and a document that sets out what some of those mitigation measures might be. But in order to develop a detailed mitigation strategy, there's further work needed in terms of understanding what those mitigations are, how they would be delivered, how they would be funded, and to discuss those with Natural England landowners and other stakeholders. So that work is ongoing. I would draw a comparison between that and when we were doing the previous local plan and issues around impacts on the pebble bed heaths and the estuary were identified at that time. And the development of mitigation strategy was a process that took place alongside that. And so I think there are some similarities there. We obviously have a bit more time before we submit the plan, and it's at the point of submission that we really need to be satisfied that the plan is legally sound and meets those tests. So we have a bit of work to do to get to that point, but we're doing everything we can to make sure we are at the point of plan submission. Mr. John made some points about XMO 18. I've had some email correspondence with him, as you would imagine, in the run-up to this meeting. The concern about access onto the Salterton Road is large in terms of the impact on the national landscape. Those familiar with the Salterton Road and that entrance into Exmouth will appreciate that that site will be essentially the first thing you will see as you drive into Exmouth from what I think it was the Budleigh Salterton across the Pebble Bed Heaths Road. And there's quite significant level differences between that part of the site and the bottom end of the site, which means we're concerned about the engineering operations and the land works that would be involved in terms of creating an access at that point and the visual impact of that on the setting of the national landscape. We're also concerned that what we wouldn't necessarily want to see is large frontage development at that point, because as you're coming into the town, it's obviously very open aspect. I appreciate Exmo 17 on the opposite side of the road will have an impact on that, but that is further into the town and off to that side. So I think it's important that we protect the openness and character of that area. But interested to hear members' views as that's debated as we move forward. We have, however, made some amendments to the wording of the policy, which you will see, and I'll touch on in a moment, with regard to Exmo 18, but we haven't addressed that particular point that Mr. John raised. Other issues were raised in terms of the water cycle study. As I say, I think it's important to focus on the purpose of that study, which is about assessing the impact of growth and development over the planned period on water supply and wastewater capacity. So the report wasn't commissioned specifically to look back and criticise South West Water or issues that have been experienced to date. It's largely a forward-looking document, but it obviously starts on the baseline of today. There obviously have been lots of pollution events in the recent past and lots of impacts from that is well known. The report is about looking forward at the impact of growth moving forward on the area. And I think it does that. One point I think was raised was about the progression of Mare Lane from the previous water cycle study, and there is a section within the report which addresses that specifically and explains a narrative of previous updates at paragraph 5.1.8 in the report, where it looks at previous updates to Exmouth Mare Lane and explains the sequence of events from the 2010 water cycle study to today. It does the same thing for Countess Weir, which was another point that's previously been raised in terms of this disparity in terms of the conclusions of the 2010 report and today. So I think that is all addressed within the report. In terms of the reduction in water usage, the recommendation is that we adopt the higher standards in building regulations for new homes coming forward. I think the report is quite clear that it's a water industry aspiration to bring about that reduction in water usage in existing properties, but obviously we have no powers as a planning authority through the local plan to require new, existing homes to reduce their water usage. So just to make that clear that that's about future performance. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chair, that covers the main points coming out of the public speakers, but happy to pick up on anything I've missed. Thank you.
If there was a site, which one would you take out to make it more sound, given the spare capacity?
Well, I wouldn't accept the spare capacity. We need headroom in the plan to ensure that it's a robust and sound plan. So it's a purely hypothetical question, and I don't suggest I answer hypothetical questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shillito. Apologies then, members. I missed agenda item 1 on our way into the meeting, which is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of September 2025. Does anybody have any issues, corrections in those papers, please? No, in which case then, as chair, I will move those minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting. Please raise your hand if you're in support. Those against? And those abstaining? Okay, thank you, members. I think that's carried. Agenda item 5, then, matters of urgency. There are none, and the same goes.
Mr. Chairman, I did ask to speak 3 times.
Yes, I was going to bring you in on agenda item 7. Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Why didn't you let me speak earlier when the others did?
Because I was advised that you wanted to speak about agenda item 7, so I'm going to bring you in on agenda item 7, Councillor Collins. Is that all right?
No.
Fine, then speak now, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I was very disappointed to see that nothing has been done to protect agricultural land in East Devon. 69% of the land in this country is farmland. There are 209,000 farm holdings. Half of all holdings are less than 20 hectares. 17 million hectares are farmed. 25% of land will be gone by, farmland will be gone by 2050. 7,000 hectares are covered with solar panels. There are plans for many solar panels to be put up in Norfolk. One plan is 7,000 hectares. Me and Peter Faithful, we went to a meeting at Holsworthy where there were one plan was for 2,700 hectares of land. And after the meeting we went to look at the land, and it was beautiful square fields. God, I'd love to farm that land looking at it. Now, it's very, very sad. The world situation, there's a world shortage of beef. That's why the prices are so high. Rainforests are being cut down. There's 50,000 acres of rainforest in Mexico, which has been cut down to grow avocados to feed the people in this country. Rainforests were cut down in the Philippines. They've had terrible, atrocious weather. 90 million hectares have been affected in the Philippines with flooding. 55,000 farmers affected. 19 million tons of rice and corn, all gone. They get 20 cyclones a year, and they get tsunamis and horrible weather. This year it's been exceptionally bad. Lots of houses have been flattened there. We do need our land because we're not going to be able to import food. All these countries, Asia, all of Asia has been affected terrible.
That is your 3 minutes. Could you wrap up, please, Councillor Collins?
That's it.
Okay, returning to the agenda then, folks. Agenda item 7, the East Devon Local Plan's second stage of Regulation 19 consultation. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So this item seeks committee approval for the second stage of Reg 19 consultation, the intention being to start the consultation at the end of this week and run through to the 26th of January. That would therefore be an 8-week consultation, extending from the standard 6 weeks by 2 weeks to take into account Christmas and New Year. What you have in the papers is track changes version of the plan, which includes changes agreed at members' previous meetings. Obviously, some changes were agreed, particularly at the 2nd of September meeting in relation to particular sites and in relation to Malcolm. But there are also numerous minor changes to wording, which sought to address some typos and formatting issues that we've identified, and also a small number of gaps in policy, refinement of policy in light of new evidence, and some updates in relation to housing employment data that we've received now that those have been rebased to the 1st of April of this year. Within the track changes, you'll see there's various comments that should seek to explain those changes, but just to pick up on some of the more significant changes within the document, I'd highlight that paragraph 3.8 now includes some text highlighting that a review or update of the plan will be initiated if housing is not being delivered in accordance with the plan or identified needs change in the future. This also includes possible unmet need in neighbouring authorities. This follows the approach endorsed by the Teignbridge Plan Inspector and seeks to address issues of future unmet need and the duty to cooperate issues around housing numbers. and is in accordance with the NPPF. So we think that's the best approach to deal with those issues, taking a cue from what the inspector in the Teambridge plan has recommended to them. There are obviously various factual changes to reflect the updated housing needs assessment. So you'll see there's some updated figures around, for example, affordable housing requirements, where the figure is slightly different from what we previously had. Strategic policy SPO3 has been updated to reflect the current designated neighbourhood area housing requirements. So those figures have been updated to reflect the current position. There are also various updates in response to the habitat regulations assessment to make it clear that appropriate mitigation will be required and to require allocations to provide linkages into adjoining habitats where appropriate. There are updates in response to the further strategic flood risk assessment level 2 work that's been ongoing, and where necessary, we've put in text into allocations to ensure that proposals coming forward on those sites take account of that work. We've made a change to strategic policy WS10 in relation to land north of Topsham. This has been updated to reflect current DCC requirements in terms of education provision there. As has been mentioned, the allocation of Exmo 18, Liverton Business Park Phase 3 has been updated to address impacts on the setting of the national landscape. We've also done some updates to reflect archaeological investigations. Members will recall on the 2nd of September, we noted that there was ongoing work in terms of archaeological investigations on some sites. And those works are largely completed now, but there are some sites where that work's concluded that there are particular things that need to be taken into account as proposals are developed for those allocations. So we've added additional text on those allocations to that effect. Some other allocations have been updated to ensure opportunities to conserve and enhance the national landscape and conserve the significance of heritage assets are fully explored in response to concerns being raised by Natural England and Historic England. We've also updated added in a paragraph at 5.13 to reflect the latest position with regard to Tipton St John Primary School. And strategic policy SD27, which relates to allocations at Tipton St John, has also been updated to cover off the position if an alternative site for the school were to come forward, such that the 5 self-build homes also allocated for that site would only cover up to 20% of the site, therefore ensuring we don't end up with 5 massive houses on large plots, which would be out of keeping with the area. Strategic policy SD14, neighbourhood plans, has been, this was neighbourhood plan development at Cliff St Mary, so that's now been deleted in light of the neighbourhood plan for Bishop's Cliff Parish having now been made. The allocation of Wood _28, land northeast of Exton Farm, has been updated to include reference to the safeguarding zone around Limpston Commando. The site is partially within that zone, but it doesn't prohibit house building. So it's just to ensure that that's taken into account at the detailed design stage. In light of discussion at your September 2nd meeting, strategic policy AR02 water quality and efficiency has been updated to reflect members' decision to include an overarching requirement that permission will not be granted where there is inadequate water infrastructure to service it. And that obviously stems also from recommendations in the water cycle study that's before you today. Requirements for accessible and adaptable housing have been updated to reflect latest housing needs assessment work. Policy SEO2, employment development in the countryside, has been updated to make express reference to agricultural buildings and requirements for them, just to clarify that distinction between agricultural buildings and wider employment development. We've also updated the parking standards at policy TR04. So these have now got an added section covering electric vehicles and charging requirements, seeking to secure on-street and off-street EV charging points that would exceed the requirements of building regulation standards. This is partly in response to obviously trying to address the climate change emergency, but also helping to address concerns about air quality at the Pebblebed Heaths. Noting that that's primarily caused by vehicles, petrol and diesel vehicles travelling over the pebble beds. So the more we can encourage electric vehicle and transition to EVs, the more we can help to mitigate that. Policy PBO1, protection of habitats, has also been amended to better reflect the distinction between international and national designated habitats, and the different requirements that relate to those. That's also been carried through into policy PBO4 in relation to habitat regulations assessments. And that also picks up also on amendments that have been carried out to address air quality issues at the pebble beds as well. We've also updated text at Strategic Policy OS01, access to open space and recreation facilities, to address issues raised by the police about designing out crime and access for all to those spaces. So those are the main ones to highlight. As I say, there are numerous other changes to wording and tweaks, but those are the ones that I think have most impact in terms of changes. So those are included within the track changes document that's before you. The intention is through the consultation to have a summary table that summarises those changes and then provides hyperlinks across to the track changes version so people can see that change in the context of the plan and understand why those changes have been made and track that through. There's also a new policies map. You'll see that there's a link in the agenda to that at paragraph 3.3 within this report. Apologies, we have had some technical issues with that, so there have been occasions where it's not been working. I think it is now working, having checked before I came into the room, so fingers crossed. But we're working on the resilience of that. I think the issues relate to the uploading of the layers, so there's a huge number of layers on that map, and trying to get the balance right between having the right number of layers uploading right from the start. Previously, it was trying to upload all layers when you went into it, so if your broadband was slow, it was taking a long time and falling over. But we are working on that. I think currently it just uploads a few key layers and seems to be working a lot better since that change was made. Turning to supporting evidence then, so clearly we've been seeking to consult on evidence documents for Malcolm, which were discussed at your meeting on the 2nd of September. We also now have the long-awaited water cycle study, which has been noted, and there's some commentary in section 7 of the report in relation to the water cycle study. Just to pull out some of the main conclusions from that, you will note that the biggest issue, I suppose, is in terms of wastewater issues. As we knew, there are some issues in relation to potable water supplies, particularly in locations such as Otterton, Fairmile and Fenny Bridges, where further abstraction is unlikely to be permitted. But we're assured through the study that South West Water have proposals in place in relation to distribution across the wider area, including from Cheddar 2 Reservoir and Whitecross Distribution Scheme, to address demand issues, and they're also working to reduce leakage, which is a contributing factor as well. Turning to wastewater issues, there are several wastewater treatment works within the area that are projected to exceed or approach their permitted dry weather flow limits post-development, and therefore necessitating upgrades or phased development through the plan rollout. Those relate to Collerton, Honiton, Fluxton, Fennerton, Otterton, Mare Lane and Dunkers-Well. So quite a number there that need to be addressed. And it also notes critical investment is needed at Exmouth Mare Lane, as we know, and also Counters Weir wastewater treatment works to address hydraulic stress, sewer flooding and future capacity needs. There is also a need for a new wastewater treatment works in the west end of the district to address future pressures on Counters Weir, and obviously development from Malcolm, which will create additional pressures in that area. So there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of working with South West Water in terms of the timetabling of the delivery of growth and development in the district in sync with capacity improvements that they need to undertake within their infrastructure. There are a number of key recommendations that come out of the water cycle study, some of which have been touched on already, but include adoption of lower water efficiency standards for new properties coming forward in the district of 110 litres per person per day. Issues around requiring environmental impact assessments for new developments that affect water services or protected habitats, integrating biodiversity-friendly design into developments, particularly in relation to sensitive areas, and obviously continued stakeholder engagement. So those recommendations have been incorporated into the plan that's before you today. And as is mentioned in the agenda, the proposal is to bring a further report post-consultation specifically on the water cycle study so that we can pick up on feedback from consultees, particularly people like the Environment Agency and Natural England, and have a wider debate, also further to further conversations that we're hoping to have in the meantime with South West Water. So proposal is to have further debate at that time once we have that additional information. As I mentioned, we also have further work on air quality issues on the Pebblebed Heaths, where concerns were raised through the Habitat Regulations assessment work about the impact of vehicle movements, particularly petrol and diesel vehicles, over the roads that cross the Heaths. This work assesses those impacts, but it does not yet go as far as we need to in terms of setting out a clear mitigation strategy. That work is ongoing. We will need to ensure that we have that work for submission of the plan to ensure that the legal requirements are met at plan submission. Members will recall that further archaeological works were awaited in relation to some site allocations. The current position with these sites is set out in paragraphs 7.14 to 7.19 in the report, and revisions to policies have been made when necessary. In the case of AXME_09 and SEAT_13A, some further investigations are needed, but our working assumption remains that these sites are suitable for allocation. An infrastructure delivery plan is now included in the evidence library and sets out the infrastructure requirements to deliver the plan as they stand today. But this document will need to be kept open and updated as work moves forward. It is essentially a fluid document anyway, in that sense, but it's currently being updated to amalgamate the needs arising from Malcolm into the main document. Members will recall there was some discussion about the infrastructure requirements for Malcolm at the 2nd of September meeting, so it's just bringing those areas together now into the final version, or well, final version for consultation. As has been mentioned, an updated statement of community involvement is also appended to the report. This sets out how and when we will undertake consultation and needs to be kept up to date. This is largely a procedural thing in terms of ensuring that's up to date. There are only minor changes proposed to some tweaks to wording within that, but nothing fundamental in that. So turning to the recommendations, in summary, members are asked to agree the plan for consultation from the end of this week to the 26th of January, as said, thereby allowing 2 additional weeks over the requirement to address the clash with Christmas and New Year. Members are asked to grant delegated authority to myself in consultation with the chair to make any minor amendments to finalise the plan ahead of consultation, and also to endorse the infrastructure delivery plan for consultation purposes. Members are also asked to note the ongoing work on statements of common ground with key consultees and stakeholders, and grant delegated authority to myself in consultation with the chair to sign these. Members are also asked to agree the updated statement of community involvement, and also to agree to the further report that I've already mentioned on the water cycle study being brought forward to a committee following the end of the consultation period. So I make those recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. 2 questions then. I have Councillor Arnott first. Okay, thank you, Councillor Arnott. Councillor Roy Collins, do you have any questions?
I can't get the agenda on my iPad.
Okay. Does anybody have just a second to help Roy with that, possibly? Any colleagues? If it's just possible very quickly. Thank you, Debbie. I don't think we have any other members outside of committee. So coming into committee then, Councillor Faithful was waving his hand around rather energetically several minutes ago. So Councillor Faithful first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dunkeswell Sewage Treatment Works does not feed into the River Otter. I believe I mentioned this before. It feeds into Madford Brook, which feeds into Madford River, which feeds into the Culm about half a mile or quarter of a mile east of Hemyock. So there is an error. I was also concerned that, I mean, this is not a question, this is a comment. The water cycle report doesn't have any mention of Cranbrook, which is rather a lot of sewage.
That'll be because it's taken into account in the existing baseline, of course, Peter. Other questions, please, members? I saw Councillor Davey, then Councillor Bailey, then Councillor Young.
Thank you. I've got a list, actually. So the first one is, and I think the answer to this is probably yes, but I wasn't quite sure when I read the section on sustainable travel, which, as you know, is one of my bees in the bonnet. Does the sort of ambitions on that, do they apply to employment sites as well as residential sites? I couldn't find any reference, and I thought we were going to put something in about this for demolition of existing buildings as a kind of last resort, and a requirement for evidence before developers came to us and said, well, we want to demolish this and rebuild, which I know is always their favourite thing, but I had understood that we were going to put in something. I couldn't find it, but maybe it's in there somewhere. I have some observations and some questions, so I'll keep the observations for later. The water cycle study is really a 50% reduction in leakages by, what was it, 2040? Is that realistic? And in the short term, I think over the next 5 years, they're hoping to achieve 10%. Given the failure of most water companies to deal with leaks, this is obviously in drinking water, water supply rather than sewage, which, as we know, is also plagued with leaks. Are those really realistic, and have we seen any plans or any evidence that South West Water think this is achievable? Also, on conservation areas, do we have any scoring criteria for this? I know if we're looking at a tree preservation order, we have a kind of scoring criterion, and I just wondered if there's any way that we have a kind of scoring mechanism for conservation areas to decide whether to designate an area as conservation area. Finally, on page 153 in my agenda pack, policy CCO2B talks about solar panels and heat pumps in homes being available, or the easy connectivity being available. There's a suggestion that this is going to come in government regulation, but why not mandate those anyway? We've heard Councillor Collins talking about the amount of farmland being used for solar panels, and yet there are numerous, well, the majority of roofs in this country that don't have solar panels on them. And I just think a new build, solar panels should be there automatically. I think the government probably agrees, but I just feel that maybe we shouldn't leave that one to chance and should just mandate that all new homes have to have solar panels. It just makes total sense. It's better for the occupants, and might, I don't think it's totally the answer, but might take some of the pressure off farmland for solar farms. And it's something people always bring up whenever we're talking about solar farms on farmland. People are asking, why not just have them on roofs?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. I'm going to come to Councillors Bailey and Young for further questions before I ask Ed to respond. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. These arguments seem to be going round and round in circles. I have particular sympathy with our first speaker of today when he says there should be no development in the buffer zone. Because according to which authority you take advice from, one authority, which is a major one in Devon, says, well, you can have possibly industrial sites, playing fields, allotments in the buffer zone.
Is there a question here, Councillor
Well,
Bailey?
it's an observation. There will be a question. Bear with me, Chair.
I'll take your word for that.
I know we're in a rush, but I think we're in that rush. Thank you. So I have every sympathy with what he says there. Depending on who you ask, you get a different answer. So I would like to support what was proposed by this first speaker, that we make it absolutely clear in this plan, no development, which is quite simple to do.
And the question is, therefore?
And the question is, are you going to do it? That's my question. Is that worth waiting for, sir?
Could I perhaps make a plea to committee to take the questions section in good faith rather than tagging on technical questions at
Are
the
you going to
end?
answer my question, Chair?
The question's been put, Brian. I think you'll find we considered it in the September meeting, but the question has been put.
Well,
Councillor Young.
it's not good enough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations to the team for bringing all this together. Every local plan I look at, it seems to be growing all the time, and well done on that. Regarding the maps, do I take it that we're going to have the old map and then the new map, so we can compare one with the other? Obviously, we'll need two computers to be able to do that, but some people are lucky enough to have that. Water use, reducing on new builds, but existing dwellings, I presume that's going to stay the same. There's a lot of talk that we'll have to go back on all the old housing and make sure that they don't use any more water than the new percentage. The water cycle study, as far as I'm concerned, needs a lot more work on it. And can you confirm that this will be included in the public consultation so people can give their views on the water cycle report as well as the local plan? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Freeman. Omnibus number 1, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so if we come back to Councillor Davies' comments, I assume in terms of ambitions for sustainable travel, you mean promoting walking and cycling and public transport use. Yes, so that applies equally to employment developments. I can't remember the exact provisions in the plan, but obviously we want to encourage people to walk and cycle to work, use public transport and make provision at employment spaces to facilitate that through provision of cycle parking, EV charging points, good public transport connections, all of those things. So yes, it's equally important at destinations like that as it is at people's homes. In terms of issues around demolition of existing buildings, so strategic policy CCO6, I think it is, relates to embodied carbon and requires justification for demolition of existing buildings. Do you have a page number, Matt?
135.
Page 135 in the plan. So hopefully that's adequately covered in that. Is a 50% reduction in leakages realistic? It's a question I'm happy to take away and talk to South West Water about. I know from previous discussions they are putting a lot of investment into addressing leakages within their network, and that's seen as an easy win, as it were, but quite an expensive one, I suspect. So I'm not really the right person to answer that question, but we can certainly try and bring that forward in the further report on the water cycle study further to further conversations I hope to have with South West Water in the meantime. Conservation areas, I'm not sure if there's so much a scoring matrix, but there's quite a lot of guidance out there about the designation of conservation areas. Obviously, each conservation area is different and unique in terms of what makes it important in heritage terms. So it's probably quite difficult to have a scoring criteria in the same way that we do for trees and tree preservation orders. So I don't think there is one in the same way as for trees, but there's quite a lot of guidance out there on that. And obviously through the heritage strategy, which we'll come on to, we want to work with communities in terms of identifying those suitable areas for conservation area designation and reviewing the existing ones and the management plans and documents that relate to them. Solar panels and heat pumps, yes, and policy CCO2B, I think it is. So yeah, I mean, there is an issue there which I think is flagged up in a comment in the document in that we're awaiting the new Future Home Standard to be published. So you might recall in the previous meeting, I can't remember the date, we had quite a lengthy conversation and debate as the committee over the requirements there. The intention had been to require sort of connectivity for solar panels and heat pumps so that they could be added at the lowest possible cost, but not to actually require them, because the danger was that if we required them, then developers would get their points scored under the building regulations from those and not deliver other things that were perhaps more integral to the build in terms of insulation measures and things like that. So it was considered that we could get best bang for our buck, as it were, by not requiring them to actually be fitted, but requiring all of the wiring and supporting mechanisms and things to be in place. The new Future Home Standard may change that, because it may require them to actually install them all, in which case that might not be the right approach. But we don't know until that comes out. So the policy is as it was after that debate as things stand. We'll have to see how things evolve and whether or not a modification is needed through the examination process to reflect where government policy gets to in the meantime. I think the positive thing is it's all heading in the right direction of requirements being more and more in terms of moving towards low carbon housing and delivering mechanisms to secure that. So hopefully it's heading in the right direction either way, whether that's coming through our policy or through changes to building regulations. Coming to Councillor Bailey then, so this question about no development within 400 metres of the buffer zone. As the Chair has said, we did actually have an option in a report that came to you on the 2nd of September when we were debating XMO 20. The report set out I think it's four different options for how we could deal with that site. One of which was to draw the boundaries to exclude that 400 metre zone. As I said already, I think that there are issues with that in terms of technically it's the 400 metre zone is about residential development within that area. So is it therefore justified and reasonable and necessary to restrict other uses within that area? But also this issue about where the access road comes in from, because as you'll know from previous discussions about this site, the access road needs to come in that direction. So if you take that 400 metre zone out of the allocation, then there's no access to that site, which then calls into question whether or not it's viable and deliverable without an access that's adequate to serve the needs of the development. So my advice then, and it remains, is to continue to include that area within the allocation and the settlement boundary, with the wording in the policy that makes it very clear we shouldn't have residential development in that area. We could look at tweaking the wording of that if members want, in terms of perhaps making that stricter. But ultimately, development coming through in that area will have to be subject to habitat regulations assessment based on a detailed design and a detailed proposal. So those issues will all be considered through that process.
Later, Councillor Bailey.
So if we move on to Councillor Young's questions, so I assume in terms of old map, new map, you mean in terms of the policies map. So the policies map for the existing adopted local plan is still online and accessible, so people will be able to use that alongside the new one. And yeah, as you say, if they've got two screens or two devices, they can do a comparison to their heart's content if that's what they want to do. In terms of reducing water usage then, as I said before, we don't have any control over water usage in existing dwellings. And the new dwellings that are coming forward and requiring that additional optional requirement through planning policy that's then delivered through the building regulations regime. But there is an aspiration in the water industry generally, which I think the water cycle study notes, to bring down water usage in existing properties. But I think that's more through encouragement and advising people and that kind of route. It's not something we're involved with as a planning authority, so we'll have to leave that to the water companies and Ofwat and whoever else is involved in that. In terms of the water cycle study, so yes, people will be able to comment on the water cycle study and all the evidence documents through the consultation process. And I think this is where we've reached with the water cycle study, is there's a need for that wider consultation and engagement. If there are things coming through that work that require addressing in terms of a revised version of the study and additional work that we need to get Haskoning to do, then we can discuss that in that additional meeting next year, once we've got that feedback in terms of the consultation and secure any further work that's needed in relation to that area at that time. So, you know, I think as far as the existing commission is concerned, that's the final report, but it doesn't mean that we can't commission further work in the future if that's what members want to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Collins, is it a question? Yes. Go ahead. Microphone, please, Roy.
So, my cousins farm Colles Farm, Giddisham. That is beside the River Otter, and they have a lot of flat fields which flood regularly. These fields, they do not ever need to put any artificial manure on them or farmyard manure, because when it floods, there's a lot of nutrients in that water that fertilise the fields. Now, I would like to ask a question. Honiton Sewage Works does not cope with the sewage it's got already. In the 1970s, there was a sewage embargo, and there were no new houses. No estates were allowed to be built in Honiton because of the embargo. Can you not put an embargo on Honiton Sewage Works? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. I'm going to answer that one myself rather than coming to Mr. Freeman. As I said to the gentleman from the Otter Valley Association earlier, the evidence, as you say quite rightly, is that the Honiton Works is not coping, is well over capacity. We need to talk to South West Water and understand the timing of when they're going to be investing in expanding that plant's capacity. And if the answer is not soon enough, then development in that catchment will be delayed until that investment is made. Have I got that right, Mr. Freeman?
Yes, that's correct, and that's what the policy in the draft plan in front of you today secures.
So hopefully that assuages some concern there for you, Councillor Collins.
There are developments, Taylor Wimpey and Hain Lane, which are pushing ahead, are going to be applications sent in.
So people
Can they be turned down now until the sewage works is modernised?
So we've got a mixture. Obviously, we've got sites, for example, at Hain Lane that have already got consent are being built out. So we obviously didn't get objections from South West Water at that time to those. So we can't stop those from building out the consent they've already got permission for. But new applications coming through, we need to assess in light of the evidence we've now got and advice from South West Water, and we can potentially reject them if there's not adequate capacity in the sewage treatment works by the time that development comes forward. Or there's the option of the Grampian conditions approach that we've been taking through planning committee on a number of sites, whereby we grant planning permission, but we make it very clear in the conditions that the development can't come forward, it can't be occupied until there is adequate capacity in the wastewater treatment system to accommodate the flows from that development. So those are the options open to you.
And just to be very clear again, the last recommendation that's in front of us today, recommendation 6, is very explicitly that we receive a further paper considering exactly those measures in the new year as soon as we've been able to speak to South West Water and the Environment Agency. So it is very much on the agenda for us to be using exactly those measures, just to reassure everyone if that message hadn't got across. Coming back to my list then, I have Councillors Fitzgerald, then Fernley, then Levine. I did see your hand, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Faithful, I'm having a bad day with names today. I will come back to you once everybody's had first bite.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me back on the committee. It's been a while. And I reiterate what Councillor Young said about clearly a huge amount of work has been going on to bring forward both the water cycle study and the Reg 19 changes. But just looking at strategic policy AR02 on water quality and efficiency, looking at point A in that 1, 2, 3 and 4, which says that planning permission will not be granted for any proposal which, because of inadequate provision of water services or inadequate or untimely provision of foul water and surface water drainage and disposal, would cause pollution, result in deterioration of the water body, overload the sewer network, or result in an increase in flood risk. Do I understand that this is a step change compared with the previous plan, where because of having this water cycle study, we anticipate that we will be able, as a planning body, to turn down planning permissions because we already have the evidence ourselves that the site is unable to cope on the bases listed here? And is that, because I know that we've obviously been looking at these things with live planning permissions already and trying to understand where we can leverage some kind of influence or push back on development where we believe that the sewage network can't cope, but we're reliant upon South West Water as a consultee to tell us whether or not they think it can cope, whether or not, you know, our observations tally with that. So that's my question. Is this categorically different because we're using our own evidence? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Fernley.
Okay, Chair. You've given us an awful lot of stuff to look at this time, so it makes putting the questions into any sort of sensible order quite tricky. We talk about the water cycle study, that more work needs to be done on it. How are we going to contribute to that? For example, I have a question that the assessment of groundwater on page 34, groundwater bodies was using data from 2013 to 18. Why aren't there up-to-date figures for that? It talks about housing numbers in Broadclyst. I think it was meaning how many are going to be built in the plan period. Well, the number there was something like 90, and yet in the plan period it's going to be over 130. So I'd be a bit worried if the whole water cycle study was that far out, if that's actually, if I've read that right. So are we going to ask lots of questions now, or do we email in, or do we have another way of doing it? I mean, surely it's not going to be through the consultation that we ask our questions. We talked about, the water cycle study talks about increase in use of water after the pandemic. This asks questions of what the population's doing in this area. Have we got so many more people that are now working from home and not travelling out of area? Hence why wastewater's gone up in this, why the use of water's gone up in this area. Question on the Pebblebed Heath. If we've got this much trouble happening in this area through vehicle movements, have we thought about having a ULEZ zone in East Devon to prevent or to improve the quality of the vehicles that are actually driving past the Pebblebed Heath? So there's a selection. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fernley. I think Councillor Levine.
May I?
You may.
Thank you, Chair. My thoughts actually were decided by the lack of coffee in my cup. In the water study, we talk about lack of water, lack of rain. Why aren't we encouraging new houses to harvest rainwater? Have rainwater cellars or rainwater baths? Because it seems to me that we are going to be short of water in the future. The studies say so, so we need to encourage that. And my second question is rather silly. In the statement of community involvement, we have a little section about councillors and what we do. And I wonder whether it's possible to clarify that when councillors sit on committees, we do not represent our wards, but are here for the benefits of the whole district. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Levine. I think that's probably enough questions for omnibus number 2. Mr. Freeman?
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, if I go back to Councillor Fitzgerald's comments about water quality, I think it is, pardon the pun, a sea change in terms of, sorry, kind of came, that's terrible. In terms of having our own evidence, because we've been entirely reliant on South West Water to tell us where there's capacity and when there isn't. So having that information ourselves is much better, I think, in terms of that assessment. We obviously will still need to consult with South West Water in terms of specific proposals, but it does give us an evidence base to push back against them if they're suggesting that there is capacity and our report suggests there isn't, which I know has always been a concern members have had, is how much can you trust what South West Water are telling you when obviously it's in their interest to connect more properties to their network. So I think that's helpful. I think the approach, though, won't be fundamentally different. I think the preference should be to grant consent where we can and put in a Grampian condition if necessary. But a Grampian condition is only appropriate if we can be assured that capacity will be available during the term of that planning permission. So if we get to a position where South West Water's proposals for upgrading that sewage treatment work are not for, say, 5 years' time from when we're looking to grant that consent, and we're granting a consent that's got to be implemented within 3 years, then it may well be appropriate to just say, well, there isn't going to be capacity during the life of this permission, so we just have to refuse it in the meantime. There will be other cases, and the cases we've had so far, I think, have been cases where the infrastructure is going to come forward within perhaps 18 months, and so we've been granting the consent, given it's a 3-year consent, but with a Grampian condition. So I think that's the distinction. But yes, I think it does give us greater information, and it'd be really interesting to have particularly comments of the Environment Agency as an independent body in terms of this work as well. So that's, I think, part of the thinking is obviously by doing this consultation, we can have everybody's thoughts on this work. There might be a few things that need ironing out in terms of it, but the fundamental recommendations that are informing this local plan, I think, are clear, and those have been incorporated into the plan. So I don't think it's so much this additional work in terms of the water cycle study is going to necessarily shape the local plan. It's perhaps shaping our approach in terms of planning applications, our liaison with South West Water, development of this pipeline of projects versus our housing supply position and things like that. So that's why I think it's appropriate for us to consult on the water cycle study and take that out into the public domain now and pick up those issues in that further report in the new year. So hopefully that answers that. If I turn to Councillor Ferney's comments, so I mean, if members have got comments on the water cycle study, and they're very welcome to email them through to me, and I can collate those separately from the wider consultation. I think my preference is at the end of the consultation, we'll obviously go through all the responses wherever they've come from, produce this report, and then we can agree what additional work, if any, is needed and go back to Haskoning at that point. As members will be aware, the water cycle study has been a long process, and there's been a lot of to and fro between us as officers and Haskoning. But that doesn't mean we've necessarily picked up on absolutely everything in every corner of the district where there are issues. So that local knowledge and expertise would be really helpful in terms of informing this work and making sure we get this right. But we need the consultation to achieve that fundamentally. But the housing numbers data should all be correct in there. It's all come from us that we've given to them. So whether there's a disparity between sort of numbers in terms of allocations and taking into account windfall sites, possibly, we can look into that and discuss that perhaps offline, as it were. But by all means, email in comments there. In terms of the Pebblebed Heaths and the air quality, I mean, I think our initial thought when this issue came to us was that much of the solution was a move to electric vehicles and reducing emissions in that area. And obviously, from I think it's 2030, all new cars have to be electric vehicles anyway. So in some respects, we perhaps thought, you know, those kind of changes would very much help, and they probably will in the future. But there's a need for wider action than that, certainly in the short term, until we are all driving around in electric vehicles, and then there wouldn't be that issue. But that's going to take time, because even after 2030, there'll be lots of petrol and diesel vehicles still on the road for many years after that, I suspect. But obviously the impacts will start to reduce at that point. So that's all being taken into account in terms of the work that we're doing. But obviously it has quite wide impacts, because obviously a lot of the development in Sidmouth and even further east from that drives across the Pebblebed Heaths to get to Exeter. So it's not just those developments that are close to the Pebblebed Heaths itself. It has wider connotations. So we need to develop those mitigation measures that I mentioned in the work that the consultants have done, and just do that extra level of detail to hopefully get sign-off in terms of the habitat regulations. Turning to Councillor Levine's questions, rainwater harvesting. I think Matt was hopefully checking in the plan, because I'm pretty sure we've got something in there about rainwater harvesting. Yes, so in Strategic Policy AR02, water quality and efficiency, point C refers to all developments should, wherever possible, seek opportunities to implement water efficiency, water storage and water recycling measures. All new dwellings should, and this then brings in the water efficiency standard. So that would include water efficiency and storage methods like water butts on new build properties and commercial development. So we'll look to secure those through that means, that policy. In terms of the statement of community involvement, I certainly agree that councillors sitting on planning committee are representing the district as a whole, and not just the district. I'll have to check as to where there's a reference to that, or whether or not we need to tweak that. Leave that one with me, and we'll check the wording that we've used. But I certainly agree that members sitting on planning committee are not just representing their ward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Do any members who've not yet asked a question want to do so, please? Councillor Ledger.
Thanks very much, Chair. Ed, on the air quality mitigation strategy, when is recommendation 2 listed on page 29 going to be completed? Because obviously that has an effect on recommendation 4 that we're bringing through.
You mean the recommendations in the substantive report?
So the mitigation strategy, we obviously need to have that for submission of the plan. Our deadline being June next year to submit the plan under the transition arrangements in the NPPF. So we'll need to bring that obviously through committee when you hopefully finally sign off the plan for submission. So that's the timeline for that work. So I'm just trying to review the recommendations and how it has bearing on that. Recommendation 2 is minor amendments.
The reason I ask is if 2 doesn't happen before the submission of next year, then there are obviously recommendation says that there would have to be amendments made to the plan. And so if that's not done in a timely manner, then recommendation 4 is going to lead to a delay in the overall plan being submitted.
So my expectation is that the changes that we've made to the plan that I mentioned that refer to habitat regulations, additional policy support for electric vehicles, charging points, etc., is what we will need to do in terms of changes to the plan itself. The ongoing work is about a mitigation strategy, similar to sort of the approach we've had with the Pebblebeds and the ex-estuary over recreational impacts, of developing a strategy that then we can collect financial contributions to through planning obligations to then secure that mitigation off the back of development, which shouldn't facilitate significant changes to the plan itself, if any. So that's my expectation. Obviously, I can't guarantee anything until we've completed that work, but that's my expectation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ledger. Councillor Blakey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm somewhat concerned that the water company, South West Water, let's call them that, are going to have the opportunity to hold developments to ransom on the provision of potable water and also particularly on wastewater treatment, because these are quite clearly going to be very necessary in the future. And I'm just wondering, are we going to find ourselves essentially funding their operation through developer contributions, rather than those contributions being used on the things that perhaps traditionally they would have been used for, simply to get them to do what should be done? Do we have any way of mitigating against that possibility of being held to ransom by the water company?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Blakey. Any further questions before I come to Ed? Peter, do you want to come back?
Just quick, getting back to my earlier question. So Cranbrook is not part of this, because there's 4 expansions of Cranbrook, but they're not seem to be part of any of this. Is that correct? Because it's not in the water cycle study.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, in terms of Cranbrook, it should all be in the baseline because, as I say, it's forward-looking. So it's looking at the allocations of growth and development that's in this local plan and the impacts of that. Obviously, Cranbrook, to an extent, is already built, and then there was obviously the planned growth in the Cranbrook plan, which should all feature in the baseline assessment in the water cycle study. So it has all been taken into account. I appreciate it's perhaps not as clear as it could be in the document, and that might be something we need to ultimately go back to Haskoning on. But I'm confident it's all been taken into account. In terms of Councillor Blakey's point, so developers pay contributions through connection charges towards water infrastructure. It's not done through planning obligations because obviously South West Water is a separate company. It's not a public company or provider. So we don't have control over what they charge, but my understanding is that that's all controlled by Ofwat as the what's the word, regulator of water companies. So they can only charge within a reasonable amount based on what Ofwat control. So they shouldn't be able to exploit that situation.
Okay, final call for questions then, as I sense we are petering out a little bit. So I've got Councillor Young, then Councillor Levine, Councillor Parr. Raise your hand now or hold your peace. Okay, those 3 then, and after that we will move into debate. Thank you, members.
Yeah, just going over that, I have seen developers' contributions being asked by the water company. Are you saying that they wouldn't be able to get 106 agreements for any improvements to the sewage system?
Through you, Chair, my understanding is it should all be done through their connection charges these days. You might have historically seen them when things were different, but under the current regime, it should be connection charges outside of planning.
Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. My question is actually about, the plan is going to go out into consultation. We've heard today from the public that a lot of people have got reservations and problems with the plan as it is. One parish in the Blackdowns has told me that they intend to go for a judicial review of the local plan. So my question actually is, what are we going to do with all the objections, and can the objections derail us to such an extent that we're going to miss all the deadlines?
Thank you, Councillor Levine. Councillor Parr, do you want to ask your question? Then we'll come to Ed, please.
Yes, I noticed that quite a few of the policies have somebody's deleted part of the title, so obviously that is going to be corrected, is it?
Sorry, is that a particular policy?
Well, quite a few of them going through seem to have had.
I think part of the issue that I'd noticed yesterday going through it is that because the banners for the policies are in blue, and then when someone's amended the title of the policy, because it's done as track changes, it's come out in blue. So you've got blue text on a blue background. They are slightly different shades of blue, but they can be quite hard to read. So I think one Matt's got up on screen at the moment is Strategic Policy AR02. I think it just reads as water gap efficiency, but I think there is a word in blue in between, isn't there, which is water quality and efficiency is what it will read. But unfortunately, because of the way the track changes has worked, it's not very clear. We will try and make that clearer in the version that goes out. And obviously, as I mentioned, there'll be a tabulated version of the changes as well, which will make that clearer.
Thank you very much. And then one very minor thing, under the parking standards, it says that cycle parking requirements, secure and undercover, for a residential dwelling should be 1 space per bedroom. And then when you go further on and you find out how much parking for cycles is going to be provided in businesses, it's, for instance, 1 space for 6 staff. So I think there's something a bit wrong there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Parr. Could you pick up those few questions then, please, Ed?
Yes, so just coming back to Councillor Levine's point in terms of delays, I mean, at this point, at Reg 19 stage, we're at the point where we shouldn't be amending the plan further, essentially. So we are doing a consultation to collect comments. We'll obviously collate them and bring them to your attention, but the intention would then be to agree the plan and submit it for examination. So it shouldn't hold us up in that sense. Obviously, how long it will take us to collate those comments and get them in a position for plan submission will depend on how many we receive. But if we finish the consultation at the end of January, we've got a clear sort of 4 or 5 months before we need to submit the plan. Well, 4 months and a few weeks to do that. So that should be sufficient time to enable us to collate the comments, bring them through the committee, hopefully get the committee sign-off. It then has to go to full council to then be agreed for submission. But obviously all of those people that are still concerned about the plan, as you say, have the opportunity through the examination process to be heard by a government-appointed inspector and have their views considered through that process. And obviously we've considered their views through this process and have documented that, and those have been discussed in this forum. So I think, as I said earlier, I think people have had every opportunity to be heard through this process, but there remain opportunities through the examination in front of the government-appointed inspector to be heard again, and the inspector can recommend that we make modifications to the plan to address those concerns as they see fit. So there's still a fair way to go in terms of consideration of views, but I'm confident that we can meet the timetable, as tight as it is, based on where we are, if we can progress the consultation. And yes, so in terms of parking standards, I haven't got them in front of me, but I think it was I think you quoted 1 space per bedroom at homes and 1 space per 6 staff. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, I don't know if Matt wants to come in on this in terms of where these standards have come from, but I think in terms of cycle parking, we're trying to be realistic about, I suppose, how many people cycle to work, but ensure that there's adequate provision. So I think that's based on some national standards or guidance in terms of what's realistic, whereas at people's homes, I think there's a realistic prospect that 1 person per bedroom, you're going to need the storage space to have that number of cycles stored at your home. But realistically, a relatively small proportion of people are in a position where they live close enough to work to cycle or are able to cycle. If you're a delivery driver or in lots of occupations, that won't be feasible in terms of tools that you need to take around with you if you're a plumber or someone like that, or even coming to an office job. The things sometimes you need to bring with you, or the distances travelled won't permit that. So I think I'd like to think it'd be more than that. I'd like to think more people would cycle to work, but I think realistically, that's probably quite a high standard. I don't think 1 in 6 people in this building, for example, cycle here. I think sadly it's probably very low, and probably quite a central location. So I think that's realistic.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. I feel slightly like I'm about to open the floodgates then, but we come to debate, and I will come outside of committee first to Councillor Arnott, who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you very much. Oh, it's working. So thank you very much, Chair, indeed. Thank you to all the public speakers. Thank you to the committee. I think it's worth pointing out to members of the public, these lovely people get no extra allowance for doing this unbelievably stressful, time-consuming, frankly unpopular job. So thank you all. So you'd be disappointed, Chair, if I didn't address the matter of the water report and South West Water. So on the 22nd of February 2024, this council declared a motion of no confidence in South West Water. I was very keen to associate myself with that, and one of the reasons that I understood then that perhaps other members didn't know is in your report. So it's on page 593 of the report, or if you've got the water report open itself from Haskoning open, it's the last couple of pages, and it is entitled Summary of Consultations with South West Water. Okay, so that covers a period from October 2022 until effectively the present day, the interactions between Haskoning and South West Water. Now, I'm not going to doubt that Haskoning were doing their best in trying to get blood from a stone from South West Water. But if you look at the first phase of consultation, from October 22 to March 23, information that should have been supplied within 40 days actually came very late. If you look at the second phase, that was just, so if you look at actually consultation 3, again, you've got South West Water swerving, bobbing, weaving, trying to answer questions put by Haskoning on behalf of this local authority, I should say, in ways in which they favoured. Follow-up meetings were meant to have taken place, however, something seems to have gone awry there. Consultation 4 then, and by the way, all this time, the clock is running down. All this time, we are giving planning permissions. All this time, we are developing our own local plan, when we should have had this information from South West Water 2 or 3 years ago. And we've had to really push them through our officers to do so and go to the extent of declaring a motion of no confidence in them. The final line in the document from Haskoning says the data provided by South West Water did not provide clarity on the comments initially raised. As such, the additional data provided by South West Water following consultation on the WCS report was not incorporated into a revised version of the WCS. Chair, South West Water have led this council and Haskoning operating on our behalf a merry dance. And what worries me now is that in all good faith, Mr. Freeman, and I have no doubt about it, has said repeatedly that he will be asking further questions to help us with the further development of this local plan from South West Water, who we've already passed a motion of no confidence in, and in whom, in this report, that is fully justified. And I'm saying that now because I do understand, Chair, that there is a recommendation that we need to bring back a report to look at. I think it's recommendation 5 or 6, forgive me, I haven't got that page of the agenda open. That's good. we should look at this report, but it is an unbelievably unfortunate confluence of events that on the very day this committee is being asked to make progress to the second stage of Regulation 19, it's also being asked to consider the water cycle report. I mean, that's not our fault, but forgive me to our friends from Exmouth and Escape over there, it looks terrible. I know Chair and Mr. Freeman have done everything to fight to get this information out of them. But the problem from this council, and I'm going to have to put this to scrutiny, I think, is that we've been round this road once before under previous administrations. There was a water study report, I believe came forward in 2010, that was completely ignored in relation to the development of a previous local plan. So what I had tried to do desperately as leader of this council was make sure that never happened again. And yet here we are. It's not being ignored, but it's incredibly late for these hard-working members of this committee to consider properly. I don't know what the answer is, Chair. We are where we are. I admire enormously the progress personally you have made in pushing forward this local plan. We have to do it. We are under extraordinary, some would say ridiculous constraints and demands from central government on this. Councillor Fitzgerald asked the absolute key question here, which was really, because of this report, are we now able at last to summon up some courage and actually refuse speculative planning applications on the basis of it? And I'm not sure we're clear on that even now. So I don't know if that's a helpful contribution, Chair, but it's from the heart. Thank you.
Clearly. Thank you, Leader.
Mr. Chairman, we have been going for nearly 2 hours, whether we should have had a break.
So my understanding is because we're in the middle of an item that is frowned upon. So Mr. Hunter's advice is that we backed through it. If members desperately need 2 minutes, are you going to put a motion of no confidence in me, Mr. Hunter?
No. If they do have 10 minutes, then obviously don't discuss this matter.
Okay, so in which case then at that point, as Councillor Faithfull has raised the point, do members need 5 minutes? Bearing in mind, okay, in which case then we will adjourn until midday, but as Mr. Hunter has just said, members, you cannot discuss with each other, with members of the public, the business that we are looking at now at all for any reason, please. So we will pick up again at midday. Thank you. Haven't done that yet. We are just waiting for Councillor Bailey to rejoin us, members, when we will get started again. Okay, thank you, members. We're going to get started again, please. Perhaps the grapes could take a seat. Thank you very much. So we were just outside committee, having just heard from Councillor Arnott. Councillor Collins, do you have any comments to make, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've watched councils abroad, Australia, Canada, United States, and all these councils, they run this water and sewage, which South West Water does, and they've got full control over everything. We need to get these South West Water brought back into public ownership so that we've got control. And one thing I did watch with the United States was their sewage works. They turn their sewage into fertilizer and they sell it in bags to the public. So there's a valuable resource which is just going down our rivers and polluting everything. Maybe you could get South West Water to look into this, because it seems wrong that you've got a valuable resource being wasted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Collins. Coming into committee then, members who would like to speak on this item. I have Councillor Davey, then Councillor Young, please.
Thank you, Chair. One small one, page 301, it talks about housing eaves being constructed in such a way as to facilitate nesting by house martins. Doesn't mention swallows. I just feel that should be both. It's policy anyway, and it really doesn't matter to the swallows whether they're classed as house martins or not. But I just thought it would just make sense, as they are both nesting birds that use eaves. My next point is about Exmouth 20. My understanding was that the 400-metre buffer from the Pebblebed Heaths would restrict development of any sort, and it's been suggested there could be employment or community use in there. Employment use I'm not so concerned about, since it would be daytime, we could place restrictions or conditions in planning on the timings and lighting and so on. But I'm a bit more concerned about the suggestion it could be community use. If you cite some kind of community hall in there, you're going to have people coming and going, you're going to have lights going on all the time. Ditto, if it was a playing field, you could have floodlights that are going to be disturbing to wildlife. So I'm kind of more inclined to go with what Councillor Bailey was suggesting, that we simply don't have any development within that 400-metre buffer zone, so that it is left pristine, possibly even further developed for wildlife.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on a couple of points that our leader came up with, and from the other councillor. I've just heard today that Budley has lost its water quality from excellent to good, which is very bad news, seeing we've got a blue flag there. And the other issue is that we are about the only country in the world with a commercialised water and sewage company. In the old days, in the 1950s, they were run by councils. They were all being underfunded and losing a lot of money on it. So it was agreed that it became water boards, and then the water boards became these commercial companies. It's peculiar to this country, but I don't think this council have the power to change that, unfortunately.
And of course, the American model of publicly owned water boards, not the universal solution to everything, particularly if you ask people in Flint who got quite a lot of lead in their water supply as a result of it. I don't know who I saw first, so I'm going to go with Charlotte and then Brian, please.
Thank you, Brian. Just picking up on what Councillor Davey just said about Exmo 20 in the buffer zone, he's pretty much said what I was going to say, but the other thing that I would mention is that we have a bit of a problem with antisocial behaviour, people driving cars and donutting in the car park at Lime Kiln, which is extra problematic because we're not allowed, because it's in all sorts of protected areas, being right next to the LORP, it does not have lighting, and I understand anecdotally that the police cannot put in cameras because there's no lighting to actually try and do something about the problem. So that's just another consideration that I would add in terms of the development, what may be in scope for development within that buffer zone. I also appreciate what Ed said earlier about it potentially creating a huge problem for the access road if we were to bring it outside of the plan area. So I don't necessarily have a particularly strong view on that, but I do think that I would like to echo the concerns that Ollie has made about potential problems and think about how it may be that we can actually mitigate some of these further down the line with the actual planning application that comes up. So that was one thing. The other thing I wanted to put on the table was access to Liverton Business Park coming off Salterton Road. And I understand the answers that Ed gave earlier to public questions about this. However, I question why we're ruling it out at this point, because Liverton Business Park, to my knowledge, and admittedly I haven't looked at it and I know you did a lot of work in terms of looking at the economic sites and in the area a couple of years ago. it seems to me that this is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, growth site in Exmouth. It's most ideally located, to my mind, of all the industrial areas in Exmouth for this expansion. Why would we count out at this stage in the game making it as viable as possible? And I do understand the point about the visuals as you access, and I travel along that road very regularly. You know, I certainly don't want to see great big 3-4 story buildings with, you know, more burger concessions and so on as you come into Exmouth. That would spoil the views. However, working back from that, I just don't understand why we're counting out having an access to that part of the site, because surely it's up to the developers to work out something that would be affordable for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding what Charlotte's just said, I got rather heavily involved in the last planning application for Liverton Business Park, where the county highways decided that there was no need for traffic lights because there wasn't sufficient traffic, in a word, but they did extend the entrance, which did help, and a dedicated lane to go to Billy Salterton. My understanding from the officers and the councillors at the time was if there was to be any more extensions in the Liverton Business Park, that they would consider it would be essential to put in traffic lights. However, to add to the confusion, the application that's gone in opposite McDonald's, and on their plans, there's a roundabout. So pay your money and take your choice as it stands, Chair. Thank you. Now back to the plot. It's not very often that I agree with our leader, but I'm pleased to say that on this occasion, I do agree entirely with everything he said, which is probably going to happen once from his point of view and mine, but it's good that we're all heading in the same direction. I'd like to thank Ollie and Charlotte for their support on the suggestion that came from one of our residents, the first speaker. Hopefully it could be adopted without too much trouble. Now, regarding the water report, the general consensus I'm getting from the room is there's little or no confidence in this water report. Having said that, that doesn't give it justification and enough legs, as far as I can see, to be part of our decision making because of the very fact that it's not got all the details. We all know the problems with sewerage. It's massive in this area, especially on the coast. But that's not addressed in the report. So I don't think we can rely on it to make a decision when we all know the truth. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. I want to push back on what you just said about the water cycle study. I think there have been some fair comments made today in some respects, but in quite, and specifically related to the situation in Exmouth, which isn't necessarily all to do with issues that are covered by the Environment Agency methodology that we've followed here. There have been some legitimate points made there in relation to Exmouth, but I've not heard a word of critique about its conclusions in the rest of the district. Not a single word. You know, it's evidence here that the stations in Honiton's already 50% over capacity. Mr. Freeman will have the list somewhere and will correct me if necessary. But it's saying that there are 7 sewage treatment plants that do not have the capacity to cope with this local plan, and therefore we are going away to say to South West Water, right, what are you doing about this? I just can't accept the point that the study is fundamentally unusable. It's not. I will accept there are some points that we need to look at in terms of it. I think there's a fair point to be made that there's maybe more things that we could be looking at, but actually as a paper that looks into generally the state of the sewage system in East Devon, it makes some very valid and very robust conclusions about the lack of capacity of South West Water. I will accept there's perhaps more that we need to do now, and indeed we've already heard about that further report that's going to come and look specifically at the policy measures after those conversations with South West Water. But as an assessment of what it has set out to assess, I think there's an awful lot of good that can come from that. And I think there's an awful lot of weight that we can give it in our decision-making process here today. And you know, that's my view, and others will draw their own. But I think it's come to some really, really important conclusions. And even if there's more work to be done, we can't lose sight of those. We now have a document that we can, you know, whack South West Water over the head with and say, look, some independent scientists say your system is inadequate. Do something about it. And we can take it to the Environment Agency, and we can take it to Ofwat, and we can say, look, we did the work because you wouldn't, now back us. And they haven't got a choice, because we've got independent scientific evidence that says they need to. They need to do their job as the regulators. So, you know, I'll accept there's some improvements that maybe we can make and some more work that we can do. But I think it's a really important document and a big milestone for this authority in how we deal with the sewage crisis for the residents of East Devon. I'll get off my soapbox at that point. Does anybody else want, a silly question, of course other people want to speak. Who wants to speak next? Councillor Faithfull?
I just realised whether it should have been as a question, but just looking in the infrastructure, whatever report thing, that's the one. Got rather distracted with water cycles and X20 and whatever. Interested about this Sidmouth to Ottery cycleway. Is that actually going to happen? Do we know to what extent are we going to see anything coming of that? Because it's been talked about for a very long time. And also intrigued by the proposal to extend Ottery St Mary Police Station, which I'm not sure Ottery Town, I can speak to Ottery Town Council, but we own the building, and I don't think we've heard anything, and I'm not sure where they'd extend it to. But so I'm intrigued about that. I don't know if there's anything. Is that we have to speak to the police about that? Do we?
I imagine it's probably something that they have told us that they need to cope with the impacts of development. Mr. Freeman?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, yes, that's right. I mean, this has been collated from discussions with various infrastructure providers, including in terms of the Sidmouth to, the Otter Trail, the Sidmouth to Ottery cycle route, with Devon County Council as the highway authority, with the police, with the health authority, all sorts of bodies. So it's a very long shopping list or Christmas list this time of year, maybe, of things that we need as a district fundamentally to support the growth that's in this local plan. Members will recall that the previous infrastructure delivery plan, I think we had a £70 million funding gap just of the priority one projects alone. So I'm not going to sit here and say that all of this will be delivered. Because realistically it just won't be. It's just not achievable. But there are projects in here that will be critical to delivery of the growth that's in the plan, which we will need to deliver, and then there are other projects that are less critical, shall we say. And so a lot of this will come down to future spend decisions in terms of how we spend our SIL that we collect as growth comes forward, whatever funding we can bid for and tap into over the life of the plan, what monies other bodies like Devon County Council, the police and other authorities put into the mix. This isn't all for us to fund and deliver. This is about how we can work with all of those bodies to deliver the infrastructure that's needed over the period of the plan. So I can't give you any commitments as to whether or not those things will be delivered, but it's an aspiration to deliver them. And we need to work with our partners and through funding agencies to try and ensure that they are.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Colleagues? Okay, I'm going to pose a question to committee at this point then. We have had so far, to my count, 3 members of committee saying that we need to revisit the question around the 400-metre buffer zone. As Mr. Freeman and I have already mentioned, we had considered that as an option at our September 2nd meeting, and committee didn't choose to make any amendments along those lines. There is an outstanding question, therefore, given the constitutional provision about changing our mind on things. There's a question about whether or not that applies, and if committee is minded to look at making a recommendation on that issue, then we need to take a short adjournment for Mr. Hunter to consult with Mr. Freeman and make a ruling on whether that constitutional provision applies or not. So I'm looking for a sounding from members as to whether folks are minded to seriously consider that issue. Councillor Fitzgerald. Microphone, please.
So as I said, I have no strong feelings about whether or not it stays within the buffer zone stays within the site or not. And I had a couple of outstanding questions, which if Ed is able to answer or speak to some of those now, I think that would be helpful to me in making my mind up as to how I want to go ahead with this. And I think it was really about to what extent, assuming that we keep the buffer zone within the site, to what extent will we be able, or will planning be able at a later date to be able to shape the kind of development that will come forward with a view to protecting the Triple SI, which is over the other side of the road. Thank you.
So, through you, Chair, the wording of the policy as drafted is new homes and other development that would result in unacceptable impacts will not be permitted within 400 metres of the Pebblehead Heaths. So, in effect, that leaves it open through the application process for us to say which development is harmful based on a habitat regulations assessment at that time. So I'm confident that the policy as drafted prevents development coming forward in that area that would be harmful to the Pebblebed Heaths. I think it's whether or not you want to go further than that on other grounds to say we don't want built developments within that 400 metre area. And I don't think that necessarily necessitates a change in terms of the allocation boundary or the settlement boundary, because, as I said, I think that we run into issues over the road and the access at that point. If members wanted to make a change, though, you could amend that wording that I've just read out to say something like new homes and other developments will not be permitted within 400 metres of the Pebblebed Heaths. And that would have the same effect. My concern, though, is that trying to justify that, because we've already said development that would have an unacceptable impact on the Pebblebed Heaths wouldn't be allowed with that area anyway. If you open that up to no built development, then where's our justification for that? I don't think it would be in terms of impacts on the Pebblebed Heaths, because we've already precluded that from the wording we've got. So is there concern about wider landscape impacts of other issues that would justify that? I think is a question perhaps the committee needs to consider.
So that's the position from Mr. Freeman. I appreciate there are hands on this issue. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole if there isn't broad consensus within committee that we need to be seriously looking at making an amendment here, because if that is the case, then we need to come to Mr. Hunter on a legal point.
Can I just circle back and say, on the basis of what Mr. Freeman's just said, and that the details of any kind of development in that buffer would be subject to a consideration anyway based on a habitats assessment. I don't. Given what could happen with the access road, I am not convinced that bringing the buffer zone out of the site plan is the way forward. Just to be clear, thanks.
Okay. So I'm guessing Councillor Bailey, you're still of the same view? Most definitely. Okay. Councillor Davey?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm kind of with Councillor Fitzgerald on this one. And I take Ed's point. We should be able to restrict any development that comes forward on the grounds that it would pose an unacceptable impact on the Pebblebed Heaths. And therefore, we should be, my concerns were, as I stated, you know, about community use, but if it could be shown that, for instance, floodlights or siting of a community hall or anything like that would cause those unacceptable impacts, and everything's in the name, isn't it? But I think I'm happy with the wording as proposed. I certainly don't want to see the site reduced, because that's a nonsense in terms of the access road. So long as we have the powers to restrict development in that area, then I think I'm happy with the wording as it stands.
Councillor Young, briefly, please.
I just want some clarity. Are we talking about the whole area around the Pebblebed Heaths that is affected by this 400, or just this section? Because that is very important, because at the moment, Natural England support us on this policy. And if we change the wording to no development at all, that's going to put a lot of pressure on our planning department and on Natural England, because that was their suggestion to put that in on the last local plan. And if it becomes more no development at all, then we won't be able to have cycle paths. We won't be able to have sangs. We won't be able to have footpaths. All sorts of things that we would expect to see in that sort of area. So I see the reason why we would like to do it, but it brings up a whole load of other problems if we then change that policy for 400 metre all the way around the Pebblebed Heaths.
So I think, and members can correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are two sort of suggestions that have been made. One from members of the public that the site boundary is amended to exclude the 400 metre buffer zone, and Mr Freeman has then suggested that perhaps instead of that we could amend some of the wording in policy SD01 that refers to Exmouth 20 to make the requirements around that area more robust. So those are the two things that have been suggested, not amending the wholesale 400 metre boundary buffer policy. So those are the two options on the table. I'm going to call now for an indicative vote from members who would be minded to seriously consider one or both of those options. To stick their hand in the air, please. If you think, based on what you've heard so far, we either need to be amending the boundary of the site or the wording in the policy.
Can we just look at the wording in the policy? As in, I don't know what it is right now.
So Mr Freeman read it out a minute ago. Can you read it again, please, Mr Freeman?
So it's on page 88 in the track changes version of the plan. Bottom of the page, I think the relevant sentence is new homes and other development that would result in unacceptable impacts will not be permitted within 400 metres of the Pebblebed Heaths. There's a lot more words to the policy, but I think that's the key bit.
So if you are minded that that is insufficient and we either need to amend the boundary of the site to exclude the buffer zone or amend that wording, can you raise your hand now, please? Okay, so on that basis then there isn't support in committee for pursuing that. in which case we don't need to come to Mr. Hunter for legal advice on that issue. I'm sure he would. Very briefly, Brian, because I want to move
I'd just like to, the vote's gone, I bow to my colleagues, you know, you've got to go with the flow, but at least we gave it a shot. However, in the future, these decisions won't be made by this authority. This authority and the members have local knowledge, which theoretically, these decisions could be made from Central Devon, North Devon, whatever. So that, to me, makes the policy weaker going forward in 5 or 10 years' time. And strategic, we are going forward, we are supposed to plan for the future. And this is why I think the residents, myself and a few others, not enough obviously, we're thinking about changing the wording. And thanks for going through the process, Chairman.
I think by way of comfort there, Brian, and that 3-letter acronym that you're referring to without mentioning it is banned in any meeting that I chair. But I think all of the models that are on the table for the future of local government in Devon include a provision that planning committees will be local, not council-wide, and will have local members making decisions on local planning matters. So I'm hopefully that's some comfort there. Okay, so having resolved that issue on Exmo 20 then, or at least for today, are there any other comments that members wish to make on the papers that are in front of us on this item, please? I've had hands from 2 people who've already spoken. Does anybody who's not already spoken wish to speak on this item, please? Okay, in which case I'm going to propose all 6 recommendations from the chair as written in your report for good order. I will then come to Councillors Fitzgerald and Davey, and if anybody else wishes to speak, please raise your hand thereafter.
Thank you. I would just like to go back to the point that I made earlier about the access to the Liverton site. There's basically one sentence saying that access will not be from Salterton Road. It'll be going through the development, and well, we haven't discussed it, and I would like to understand the rationale for including it. With in mind that I might propose that we remove that, because as I said earlier, I'm not sure that it's something that we necessarily need. It's quite possible that there has been documentation that I haven't read about this, but I don't understand why we need to specify this at this point. Thank you.
So the wording of the existing policy on that point is to avoid adverse landscape and visual impacts on the national landscape and its setting. Vehicular access should be taken from Liverton Business Park (brackets not Salterton Road). Now, I think this came about through our view all along as officers had been when it came forward for allocation, that it was an expansion of the existing business park, and hence access would come in at the bottom. And that the built form would be kept away from the Salterton Road, and that area would, alongside the Salterton Road, would be used for biodiversity net gain, which they'll have to deliver as part of the development, or perhaps some car parking or storage area to keep that relatively open. And that's partly in terms of that entrance into the town and keeping that openness, because I think as you come in the town from that direction, currently all you really see at that point is, I think there's a cottage on the right-hand side next to where this frontage would be, and it kind of stands in isolation, and there's another field open, this again before you get to Liverton Business Park. And it was sort of respecting that sort of character of the entrance into the town, but also the setting of the national landscape, which is obviously opposite side of the Salterton Road, and concerns that the levels within Exmo 18, as I understand it, you've got a level up at Salterton Road, and then it drops quite steeply to the north away from that. as you'll see, if you go into the existing Liverton Business Park, Liverton 2 is substantially lower than Liverton 1. So there's a lot of engineering works that were involved in creating access from Liverton 1 down into Liverton 2, retaining walls, a road that sort of winds down, cut into the slope. And the concern, I think, with this is that with Liverton 3, you would end up with a similar arrangement of having this road, if it came in from the Salterton Road, having to cut into the slope and down retaining structures and things, all of which would be quite prominent in the wider landscape and views, interact with views across towards the national landscape. So we were trying to minimise those impacts by requiring the road to come in from the bottom. You would basically focus the built form of development down on the levels down in the bottom of the site, and if you needed to deliver biodiversity net gain or perhaps some parking or anything, you would come up the slope and into the higher parts of the site for those more open aspects of the use. So that was the thinking and the logic behind that. I hear what Iestyn John was saying in terms of the presentation. I think his concern is about sort of ruling that out at this stage. And I mean, you could amend the wording to make that more open, but I think it still raises the question of, do we even want commercial scale buildings on that frontage? Because I think that's what would partly result from that. What you could do, I suppose, just thinking through potential options here, is you could amend the wording to say that the primary vehicular access will be from Liverton Business Park, which could then potentially leave it open for smaller secondary access to just that unit on that frontage, if you are happy with a frontage unit there. And then we could perhaps add in some additional wording about that being sensitively designed in terms of the wider landscape and the entrance to the town. I think it comes down to, though, how concerned are you about that frontage and the visual impact of that at the entrance to the town, and its potential impact in terms of the wider landscape on the national landscape opposite. But we also have to appreciate we've got Expo 17, the other side of the road, albeit further in towards the town, but that will also alter the view at that point, because you'll have distant views of Expo 17 across to the left-hand side coming in as well. So I think those are the options. I think it depends how comfortable you are with an access at that point, and whether or not you think it should just be a secondary access if there is one. At which point, if you're comfortable with a secondary access, we could potentially amend the wording and tweak that in some way to accommodate that, or leave it open for that.
Thank you. So my instinctive feeling about this is that it's not an unsolvable problem, in that if it were a secondary access, and there doesn't seem to be any reason to my mind that you couldn't have a area provided for the biodiversity net gain of the site, or SANGs, or some kind of woodland, for example, as you come into that area. As long as there's a sign there that says, the businesses that can be accessed most easily from this side. I think the thing that concerned me was hearing just how far the traffic is going to have to go to get to that end of the site. And if you were a lot of the businesses that are currently closest to the road in that site are the more kind of, consumer businesses, if you like. And then as you get further back, you get some really big places for joinery and building firms and so on, which are down in the valley and therefore more hidden. It doesn't seem to me that it's a necessary exclusive thing. Just because you have access doesn't necessarily mean that you then need to build really obtrusive kind of buildings at that point. It just seems to me that it doesn't seem commercially viable to expect people to go through that already very, quite congested main entrance into Liverton. It can get quite congested. and then travel, whatever it is, more than a mile to get to a business. That doesn't seem viable for consumer businesses, retail businesses to me, and therefore you're really kind of narrowing the potential for that part of the site. And I don't see why we would do that unless we absolutely needed to do it. Thank you.
So I was going to come in on exactly the same point, actually, and much as I want to protect the national landscape, Mr. Freeman mentioned coming in to Exmouth and what you're going to see. At the moment, as you come into Exmouth, pretty much the first thing you see on your right is a McDonald's. So, you know, let's not get too concerned if, you know, 100 yards further down the road, there's a vehicle entrance. And I understand, but I think we could alter the wording to say any vehicular access from, or additional vehicular access taken from the Salterton Road should be sensitively designed and appropriately screened, perhaps. Because, yeah, if you look at this on Google Maps, traffic comes in off the Salterton Road, then loops round in quite a large loop, and comes, and I'm assuming we're talking about coming all the way down there through a roundabout opposite Screwfix, more or less, then doing a right where I think there's already a bit of road, and that would then lead in. But that is really quite a big detour, and there's almost an opportunity here to design a one-way system, actually, that could manage some of the traffic flow there anyway.
Thank you, Ollie. Ed has just made the point that that McDonald's would be a lot less prominent if the town council hadn't approved so much signage with its delegated advertising consent powers. But there we go. Okay. Thank you, members. So I'm hearing from the members what live down that bit that they're minded to take some kind of access off the B3178. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you very much. I understand what Charlotte and Ollie are saying, but having been a professional driver for a very, very long time, from cars to vehicles 80 tons plus, I know my way around, and looking at that junction, coming out of the industrial estate, you turn left to Budley, all well and good, but you haven't got anywhere that you could put another entrance in there, and you're bearing in mind you're coming up the dip, Liverton dip, up to a dip, which is supposed to be a 40-mile speed limit, but most people are doing 50 or 60, you know, in the real world. So I would be in favour of extending what's already there, go to the bottom and come in, as Ollie said, you can come in from the bottom end. And whoever's going to go up there, they're not going to go up on a bicycle and buy a box of nails or 3 or 4 boxes of tiles. Yes, I do. Well, you must be a very thick chap, Ollie. You must be the only one. But the majority of people aren't. So it's vehicle access for vehicle collections. And I think the determination would be from Devon Highways, who have already stated in previous negotiations to get extensions in the for the building site down there, that they would prefer traffic lights. And they are, I mean, we have to take advice from them, but they are the ultimate authority on that. So I rest my case, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. I must say I'm sympathetic to the view that actually a slightly longer way in isn't going to make that much difference, given that everybody who visits this site is going to be in a car, and driving a mile extra in a car as opposed to a mile less isn't that. You know, Ed tells me it's about 2/3 of a mile, but I think my point stands nevertheless. Are members minded to make a proposal on this? I suppose is the crux of it, because we could go around in circles for quite a while. Councillor Fitzgerald?
I'm happy to make a proposal, but I haven't got any wording.
Ed, could you, do you have any suggestions for what might be acceptable in planning terms if Councillor Fitzgerald is minded to accept a primary access or a secondary access just to the frontage? A secondary access just to the frontage. Do you have any suggestions, Mr. Freeman?
Well, funnily enough, Chair, I was making some notes. So while my recommendation to the committee would be to leave things as they are, from what I've understood from the discussion, I think this wording might suit what Councillor Fitzgerald is trying to achieve here. So my suggestion would be to avoid adverse landscape and visual impacts in the national landscape and its setting. Primary vehicular access should be taken from the Liverton Business Park. Any secondary access from Salterton Road should be carefully designed and screened to minimise any impacts on the setting of the national landscape.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor Fitzgerald? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So in which case then we are adding a 7th proposal to amend the wording under XMO 18 along the lines of the wording that Mr. Freeman has just read out there. So that is added to the proposals which I proposed earlier from the chair, added to those that are set out in the report in front of you, which we'll come back to when we come to voting. Are there any other issues that members want to bring up this afternoon, please? Okay, well, let it not be said that you did not have the opportunity to speak, in which case then we're going to come to a vote on the proposals that are in front of us, which, to remind members, are the proposals, recommendations 1 to 6 that are set out in the covering report for agenda item 7 in front of us, with the additional recommendation that we alter the wording on the allocation at XMO 18 to include the phrasing that Ed has just read out regarding a secondary access for the sites fronting the B3178. Are there any questions on those proposals before we go to a vote, please? Councillor Howe.
Just for clarity, I'd like the added proposal to be dealt with separately.
Okay. We can do that. Councillor Bailey.
Where is it proposed that this second entrance will actually physically be, please?
That would be a matter for a planning application. No, we don't. This is strategic planning. We make policy allocations here. We don't need to know exactly where along there. Are there any further questions on this, please? No? Okay. In which case then, we've had a request to take 1 to 6 and 7 separately. So this first vote, please, members, is for recommendations 1 to 6 as set out in agenda item 7. Are we all clear on that? Okay. In which case then, all those in favour of recommendations 1 to 6, please. That's 10 in favour. Those against, please. That's 2 against, and those abstaining, please. That's 1 abstention. Okay, thank you, members. So recommendations 1 to 6 are carried. We then come to recommendation 7 regarding the amendment to XMO 18 to permit, in policy terms, a secondary access to the frontage of the B3178. All those members in favour of that amendment, please. That's 6 in favour. Those against, please. I count 1, and those abstaining, please. I count 5. So that amendment is carried. And somebody didn't vote.
We've just got one person missing.
Yes. Did somebody not vote in that one? Sorry, did I miss your hand?
Abstaining.
Voted for. Okay, so 7 for then. Yeah, just to miscount that. Okay, in which case then all 7 recommendations are carried. Thank you, members. We are going to break for lunch now before we consider agenda items 8 and 9. Shall we take 40 minutes? Is that enough for members? Yep, okay. So we will reconvene at 1:30, please. Thank you.